Good morning. I guess a few people are still joining us, so we might just continue and start while a few people are joining us. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Benjamin Hankel. I'm a senior research fellow actually at Western Sydney University in Australia. I'm going to be chairing this session today. So I'd like to welcome you to the third virtual seminar in our Researching Youth series. This is this has been, I should say, a collaborative endeavour between the British Educational Research Association, so BERA's Special Interest Group for Youth Studies and Informal Education, and the British Sociological Association's Youth Study Group and the Political Studies Association, Young People's Politics Specialist Group. So since our call out for interest in the series back in autumn, I've been working with Frances Howard and Ian McGimsey, I should say, from BERA, my BSA Youth Study Group colleagues, Corinza Moore and Eve, Buck Matthews, Sophie Atherton and Janina Suppers, and Ben Bowman, who actually is one of the speakers today from the Political Studies Association group to organize this series of online events, incorporating what I think is a fantastic range of topics and speakers with experience in youth research. And I want to thank all the team who've been working towards this series so far, as well as BERA, and particularly Dior, for all the work behind the scenes and hosting the event. Okay, so onwards to today's event. So today's event focuses on co-production, co-design, and co-authorship. And just to kind of give a little bit of a preview of what's coming up as well. I'll kind of jump through that slide. A little preview of what's coming up. We've got the next event taking place on the 24th of May, which I'm sure some of you have already seen on your calendars. That's placemaking, exploring space and places with young people, which we hope you'll be able to join us for. And if you do want to see some of the other events taking place, they are on the BERA website under events. Okay, so in terms of the running order for today, we have three fabulous speakers. So Grace Spencer and Neve O'Brien are going to explore some of the ways to launch and facilitate a young person research advisory group and some of their experiences doing so. And Dr. Benjamin Bowman is going to share his experiences of writing co-authored research policy briefings with young people, and share some of his work on around some of his work with young people and experiences of climate change. And so we do hope these presentations are thought-provoking in terms of your own research and your own processes. Following these presentations, there'll be 5 minutes for question and answer after each 15-minute presentation. So please add your questions to the chat as we go. After the presentations are done, we'll have I'll provide some very brief reflections to tie some of the ideas together, and then we'll move into breakout rooms, and we'll have 30 minutes in the breakout rooms to talk, discuss some of the themes and how it connects to some of the research work that we are all doing, and to really ponder, I guess, the question that we're asking today about how to do and engage with co-production, co-design research, and co-authorship with young people. So we'll return at the end of the breakout sessions to then share our discussions as a group, noting some of those common threads and experiences. And at the end of the session today, you will probably, and actually no, you will definitely receive a feedback form in your inboxes, and that we'd appreciate you commenting on and completing and letting us know how everything went. Okay, so kind of to start, can everyone just make sure that your microphones are off? Just a little bit of housekeeping, just unless you're speaking, that would be great, just so we don't interrupt any of the presenters. So to kick off, our first presentation is from Associate Professors Grace Spencer and Neve O'Brien. And just to give a little bit of background on each speaker. So Grace is an Associate Professor in Young People, Health and Social Equity at the Faculty of Health, Education, Medicine and Social Care at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. Her research focuses on young people's health and their health-related practices with reference to concepts of risk, power, and empowerment theory. She has a particular interest in social change, youth transitions, and health and social equity. Grace is globally recognized for her expertise in qualitative research methods and ethics with children and young people, and she has published extensively on the ethical aspects of research with children and young people. Her current program of research draws on participatory forms of inquiry to explore the health experiences and livelihoods of young migrants in Ghana. And I'd like to also introduce, I guess, the co-presenter with Grace, Dr. Neve O'Brien. Neve's expertise is in undertaking participatory approaches to research involving young people. Her interests are in bullying and enabling young people to participate in research in areas which interest and or affect them. Neve holds an honorary research fellowship at the National Anti-Bullying Centre at Dublin City University and is a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Bullying and a premier member of the International Bullying Prevention Association. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and let our presenters, Grace and Neve, take over and share their screens and begin their presentations.
Thanks so much, Ben. I'm just navigating the technology as always, so hopefully that's coming up. There we go.
Yes, we can see
great.
that.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for that introduction. I'm Grace Spencer and I'm co-presenting with my colleague Neve O'Brien this morning. It's a real pleasure to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about our experiences of co-production, co-research and co-authorship with young people. And what we plan to do within sort of a 15 minutes is just to share some of our experiences to date. I'm mindful that we'll probably touch on a lot of different points, but not perhaps unpack them in quite the detail that we might have time for, but we can follow through in some of the discussion later on this morning. So we're going to share a little bit about our experiences of working with youth advisory groups. Ben has just mentioned my project in Ghana. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences of working with a cross-national advisory group with young people in the UK and Ghana. And then Neve will talk a little bit about her research, co-research with young people in terms of the pandemic and moving everything online and what that means for young people's meaningful participation in research. So I'll just start by talking a little bit about young people's involvement in research and advisory groups. And I suspect much of this is familiar and I won't say too much because I really want to sort of talk about our experiences a bit more to share some of our insights and the challenges that we faced. But obviously there is much more emphasis and increasing involvement of young people in research, and not just as research participants, but as co-researchers and youth advisors. And that stronger commitment to the idea of co-production and co-research with young people, and the emphasis really on harnessing young people's ways of thinking and knowing and doing to shape research priorities and the focus of research, but also the design and what a study might look like, right from the sort of genesis of the idea and the methods and the ethics, right the way through to dissemination and impact work. Perhaps rather cynically, I don't know whether this is, but there is an increasing expectation, I think we're all very familiar with funders around sort of consulting with research users or participants of research, and there's an emphasis obviously including young people in preparation of grant applications. And setting up a young person's advisory group is often written into grants now. And there are lots of good things about that, but I think it's also important to be mindful of some of the challenges that brings and some of the possibilities to overlook important issues when doing that, and the time and the commitment involved. And the literature talks about some of the things that are put here in terms of representation and the challenges of ensuring that different and diverse groups of young people can be involved in research. Quite often it's easy to encourage young people that are often invited to take part in something, the same groups of young people often reflecting and representing just one particular group of young people. There are also concerns around tokenism and actually what meaningful participation, meaningful involvement of young people in research might look like, and moving beyond a tick box type exercise and just kind of asking them for their opinions, but not really including them or involving them in the research in any other way. Need will say a little bit about ethics in relation to her project, but obviously ethics are involved in every aspect of our research, and particularly when we're working with children and young people, and often via gatekeepers. And there are all sorts of additional complications that presents, particularly around power relations between adults and young people, how far young people can actually take control of the research agenda, and the ways in which researchers work closely with young people, but also those around them. So various gatekeepers, whether that be parents, schools, in NGO settings, all sorts of different contexts depending on the research. So I'll just move on to say a little bit about the project that I'm working on at the moment. It's funded by the British Academy's Youth Futures programme, and we're looking at the livelihoods of young migrants in Ghana and possibilities for empowerment. Now, as part of the project, we have a young person advisory group. We have 2 young Ghanaians in the UK, based in the UK, and 3 in Ghana. So that brings a lot of, I believe, a lot of richness to the project. One of the reasons we wanted to have young people in the UK was to actually capture young people that had migrated to a different country, and to get their perspectives on what that meant, that transition and what that migration experience looked like, as well as ensuring that we had young people situated in the context where the research is taking place. Inevitably, because we're working cross-nationally, we have online meetings, bi-monthly meetings, but much more of our communication and work and discussions takes place on social media. And we have a research website that was designed by our young advisors. And as part of that website, we have a forum where they post and share their ideas and try and trigger responses and discussion amongst broader groups of young people. And we're currently working together on a co-authored paper, and happy to discuss that in a bit more detail later. But that, and I know Ben's going to move on to talk about co-authorship, but that presents all sorts of opportunities and challenges. So I thought I would just share a few of the things as we're working on this co-authorship, some of the paper. We asked our youth advisors some of their reflections on being involved in research, not just their experiences as youth advisors, but also more broadly about some of the complexities, some of the challenges, and some of the opportunities about young people's involvement in research. So these are the 3 things that our advisors have said that are really important to them, or things that researchers need to think about or consider. A key part of young people's involvement in research is about the meaningful participation. You know, and I touched on a moment ago about moving beyond tokenism, and I'll share with you in a moment one of our young advisors' thoughts on participation. But what our advisors have talked quite detailed about is around not just being involved in perhaps as participants, or even just designing data collection methods, but being part of the process all the way along. And actually, for many of our advisors, they talk about meaningful impact and affecting change. So it's not just about just being part of the research process itself, but actually shaping responses to perhaps policy, particularly within the context of this project. And actually a signal for their meaningful participation is actually impact work, and what impact means to young people, and the policy change and other practice changes that might occur as the research. Now, of course, as researchers, we all like to think our work has massive impact and immediate impact. We've done a lot of work about thinking about what meaningful impact looks like to us as researchers, but also to young people involved in the project. Another important aspect of young people's involvement in research, and based on our advisors' experience, is the possibilities, but also the challenges that come with diversity, culture, and power. So we have a range of different researchers on the team, as well as our advisors that come from, they're all Ghanaian, but they come from very different socioeconomic backgrounds, education backgrounds, and that brings a wealth of different experiences and different perspectives, but then there's also the challenge of reconciling those differences. And some of those differences are also embedded within cultural constructions of what it means to be a young person in Ghana, and what that means in terms of power relations, and the tendency for young people to look to or look up to adults, particularly adults in authority. And as a academic researcher, we've had to do a lot of work around actually trying to minimize those power relations, diffuse those kind of expectations that as PI, I make the decisions, or I'm in charge of things. So a lot of work in that space, actually ensuring that everybody feels that they can offer their perspectives, they can offer their opinions, and we look at meaningful ways to try and include those, but also that we try and map those according to the project goals and the milestones and things like that. And I've put here power remains with academic researchers. In some ways, I think we have to be honest and open about some of those things, that at times there are decisions that are slightly at what seems slightly out of our control, but are dictated from funding requirements or other institutional parts of the process. But again, it's important to ensure that we've had an open dialogue around some of these issues to ensure that the involvement and contribution is equally valued, and we think about best ways to take forward those different contributions. So before Niamh talks about her project, I just wanted to share this quote from Michael, one of our advisors in Ghana, because I think this captures really quite nicely how he sees meaningful youth participation. And it's something that is intentionally practiced, making sure that young people are given various roles in the research process, and that they're engaged in those aspects, not just about mere representation, or that assuming that young people might not be interested in things that seem less interesting parts of the process. So valuing their perspectives, but and their contributions that go beyond data collection. And we're doing, like I said, we're doing a lot of work at the moment in terms of impact, but also in terms of co-authorship. And I know, like I said, Ben will be coming on to talk about that in a little bit more later. So I'll pass over to Niamh, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities and challenges of involving young people in online research, particularly within the context of the pandemic.
Thank you, Grace. So Grace has just spoken to you about how she's worked with young people in an advisory capacity. And I'm going to speak to you about working with young people as co-researcher in a co-researcher role online during the pandemic. The learning across both models demonstrates the importance of young people's involvement in the design and the delivery of the research process. So my colleague Anna Dadswell and I worked with 25 care leavers as co-researchers to explore wider care leaver experiences of support during COVID-19. And this was part of a national project funded by the Department for Education, exploring social work during the pandemic. So the study was located across 6 local authorities in England, and we worked with self-selecting care leavers from each of the local authorities. We met every Tuesday on Zoom, every Tuesday evening from December 2021 until March 2021, and then intermittently until about May 2021. And the use of the participatory methodology in this project meant that the research was aligned with what the care leavers wanted and thought. They were very clear about the areas they wanted to explore in the research, but they told us that they didn't just want to report on the findings. They wanted to know what would happen as a result of this work. So this meant that we had to be very creative in terms of determining the outputs from the study. It couldn't be the usual, report on academic journals, for example. So alongside the co-researchers, we developed a film based on the findings, using the quotes from the wider study and the voices of the co-researchers. We created a Prezi presentation that the local authorities could use with their teams. And we asked senior social workers and others to make a time-bound promise to care leavers about what they would do as a result of the findings. Now, the literature shows that the pandemic generated new and intensified barriers to research with marginalised populations. So for us, some of the challenges were around unstable internet connection, where young people lost connection and had to redial back into the meetings. We also had to ensure that everybody who wanted to have a say or participate in particular meetings had the opportunity to do so. And this was actually quite difficult when working with young people who, for the most part, had their cameras off. We had to kind of read the room in that way and work out when young people wanted to say something. Ethical issues were also at play around ensuring the young people were supported. Many of the care leavers we were working with were very lonely during this time. And actually our online meetings every Tuesday was the only form of interaction and contact that they actually had with anybody during the lockdowns in particular. So to ensure that they had longer time to be together, we opened local authority specific breakout rooms both before and after each of the meetings. And this meant that the young people had the opportunity to check in with their own local authority and the support workers who were supporting them on the project, and also to maybe raise any concerns or issues or comments about the research that they mightn't want to do so within the bigger group. But the online participatory model meant that there were also additional power challenges both during and after the study. As I have said, we had to be mindful to ensure that everybody had the opportunity to participate where they wanted to. And I know Grace has already touched upon this in terms of involving young people in an advisory capacity. So we made our email addresses available to young people, and many of them did email us outside of the meetings to offer views, suggestions, comments, that they didn't bring to our attention in the main meeting. Seeking responses from adult decision makers was very challenging in relation to our findings. We had very few responses to the time-bound promise, which was very disheartening for the co-researchers, but also for us as facilitators for their involvement. They were clear from the start that they didn't want the usual report that just sits on a shelf. They wanted action from the findings, and to not get this response from adults was very disheartening for them. Finally, the young people expressed their liking for the model of meeting online and meeting each other every week. They liked sharing experiences and offering support to each other. So it was recommended that this regular online format continued across the local authorities post the research. Next slide, please, Grace. So from our presentation today, 3 discussion points in relation to working with young people as co-advisors and co-researchers have emerged. Firstly, young people need to have the opportunity to be involved in the research as early as they can be. So for some projects, this isn't always possible from the very beginning, but it can't be an afterthought or an add-on. It needs to be built into the design very early on. So providing training to young people as the project evolves is important for this, to enable them to become partners in the work and have the knowledge and skills necessary to contribute to the decision-making process. Young people also need to be rewarded for their time and commitment to the project. In the care leavers work, each local authority was awarded a budget for involvement. So they made the decisions together with their own care leavers in relation to how the young people would be acknowledged for their time. So some of the local authorities paid the young people in the form of vouchers, while one local authority actually provided a pizza delivery to each young person after their participation in each meeting. Feedback is obviously very important, not just as the project evolves, but also in terms of what happened afterwards. If young people are involving on a project design, for example, they need to know how that knowledge has been utilised. Did anything change as a result of their involvement? Timely feedback needs to be given to the groups for this. Secondly, readdressing adult-centric power relations. Again, making the shift from young people as subjects of research to full participants and to full partners in the process takes time, and it takes commitment. Time needs to be built in to fully include young people on the team. Things like jargon need to be addressed, for example. Is this language necessary? And if it is necessary, it needs to be fully explained to young people. Perhaps designing a jargon buster at the beginning of a project and adding to it as the project evolves might facilitate engagement. In the Care Leavers project, again, when we wrote our first draft of the report and took it back to the co-researchers, we were told that some of the language was too posh. So we had to work with them around accessible language to make sure that the report was accessible to the audience in which it was intended. So we decided actually to write 2 reports, one for the funders and one for care leavers and others who are interested in the findings without using too much of the jargon that was probably needed for the final report, less kind of academic-y really. So young people also need to be involved in the decisions about meeting times and agendas, consulting them about their availability and and how they can be involved at the beginning is really, really important. And we obviously need to be mindful that this might involve, well, probably quite will involve online or evenings and weekends. So just finally then, carrying out collaborative research internationally and online is possible. We do need flexibility, creativity and honesty, as we've said. Flexibility, we need to, as we've shown as we've both shown that being flexible through our approach has enabled the participation of young people in both advisory and a co-researcher role. Certainly the pandemic offered an opportunity for the Care Leavers project as a forum for 25 young people across 6 local authorities to meet together regularly online. This opportunity wouldn't have presented itself in a face-to-face way. So possibly the idea of a hybrid model of face-to-face and online could help move this work forward. Creativity in terms of being creative with young people, in terms of dissemination, in terms of methodology, needs to be embedded in the work. And finally, honesty. Grace spoke about this in terms of the involving young people as advisors. Being honest about the limitations of the research, how much involvement young people will have, what opportunities are available to them, and what can actually happen as a result of the work that they're involved in. So thank you very much.
Great. Sorry. Thank you very much, Grace and Neve. A really interesting presentation. Did everyone want to give a bit of a virtual round of applause for what was really, I think, 2 really fascinating projects, and I really found it interesting how you brought the 2 together to really think through how you do co-research with young people, often spread across multiple locations. Just as we're going, like I'm a bit conscious of time, but if anyone has any, and there's the there's the overview of the schedule for the day, which we're a little bit behind on, but that's okay. What I was going to say was, does anyone have any questions? Maybe we could take one question. Yes, I saw Katie, your hand up first. So did you want to ask a question?
Hi. Hi. I'm an ARU PhD student. I've carried out some focus groups online with LGBTQ+ teachers, and I was really interested in how you said that the young people really liked the online group format, and that you recommended that it continued. One thing that I was wondering was whether you'd thought about, and whether you thought maybe it could be to do with the kind of support aspect of them all having the care leaver thing in common, because I think what I found is that the LGBTQ+ population really found this a similar thing, and that would be I thought it would be quite a lot to do with the them having you can I'll stop talking.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, you're right. Actually, a lot of it was to do with the fact that they kind of shared this similar identity, as it were, and they did like the fact that they were provided with opportunities to speak with other people with similar shared experiences across England, as opposed to just those they see regularly or just within their own groups and stuff. We had a lot of feedback on the research and the project, and how much they enjoyed that, and how much their views were taken into consideration and all of that kind of stuff. But certainly meeting together as young people and as young care leavers was something that they really took from the project, and understanding the support that's needed to make sure that these things can go forward, and adults understanding when they need to step back and let young people carry on is something that is constantly evolving.
Thanks, Neve. Katie, really interesting question. I think the idea of kind of identity as playing a critical role in some of this work in co-research and co-production is really fascinating. If others have additional questions, did you just want to put them in the chat for now? And we can come back to those later. I'm just very conscious of the time and just want to keep moving along. The second presentation that we have today is from Dr. Benjamin Bowman. Ben is a lecturer in sociology at Manchester Metropolitan University and a member of the Manchester Centre for Youth Studies. He is an interdisciplinary researcher with an interest in young people's everyday lives, everyday politics, and the place of young people in democratic society. Ben, did you want to
I've got slides
share?
for you. I can do
Yes,
that.
you do?
Yeah,
great.
And also, because I put some hyperlinks to the sources, I'm going to put a link to the slides in the chat. So if you want to access it, you can, to those of you at home. Or indeed work, as I'm at home. I'm at work today, which feels a bit strange, I must say. Right, where are we? There we go. I also get worse and worse at these online meetings as time goes on. Right, can you see my slide here?
Yes.
It should say all flourishing is mutual. Do you see that?
We can.
Excellent. So my name's Ben. It's nice to meet you and thank you for coming along. My presentation for you here is on co-authorship. Now, there may well be young people in the audience, but I kind of guess not. I guess that most of us at least would be researchers if we divide young people from researchers. At least most of us would be professional researchers or people thinking about doing research from that kind of approach. And so actually, I have what is, I think, going to be quite a gentle presentation for you, but one looking at the experience of being, say, the PhD candidate or the early career researcher or the lecturer or whatever, what's traditionally called the researcher in a project involving co-authorship. Now, the title of this is All Flourishing is Mutual. This title I've taken from Robin Wall Kimmerer, but it was quoted to me by a young co-author when we asked what co-authorship was like. And so that it's true that this is kind of from a researcher's perspective, but it's also, I think, from the perspective of so many co-authors and co-authorship projects that I've read about or been glad to be part of, that young people, when they co-author with us, if we're going to make that distinction, that young people often want us to flourish too, and they want our projects to flourish. And so, so I don't think that necessarily I'm doing something that young people wouldn't tend to support, though of course young people are all different. I think co-authorship is a mutual flourishing. And Pooja Kishanani is a young co-author that we're working with, hopefully in publication very soon, who, when asked to describe co-authorship on a project involving climate change, said, "We embark on this journey by listening and learning from each other's stories." And that's really what I want to talk about, is how we do that. So this is all my details. I'll put this slide up at the end, yeah, I hope it goes well. Okay, so in today's session, this is how I've broken it down. Number one, I'm going to be intentionally harsh about co-authorship at the start, because we often talk about things like this as beautiful and lovely. They're also very hard. And so I'm going to start with that hardness, that difficulty. And what I want to tell you is that co-authorship is a real mess, which is good. You know, you've got to have a love for mess to do it. Second, I'm going to kind of take that idea of mess and talk about being the mess bringer. So being the researcher or the professional researcher or whatever you are, and coming into this space of co-authorship, being the person who brings the mess. And I'll talk about that. And then finally, I want to reflect a little bit, although I wish we had all day. We've got like 15 minutes. I want to reflect a little bit on how we articulate messiness. So in other words, how we take that messy process of co-authorship and put it into the more or less structured things that we have to do, like ethics and academic publications. Okay, so my stash box here is not that messy. So co-research is a mess. And I really like this approach to co-research. I like this description of it. Facer and Enright here are writing on a co-research project in Bristol. If you click that in the slide, you'll get to their report. They describe co-research as inevitably more unruly, rich, and messy than we can do justice to here. I've got 2 take-home points for you from this quote. Number 1, it's messy. And number 2, if you look between the lines here, they're talking about it being more unruly, inevitably, than we can do justice to here. What you have is in co-research and in co-authorship, if you want my experience and advice, that actually that process of talking about it tends to be an elimination or re-articulation of the mess. It gets tidier as you go along. So as a research, somebody doing research and starting out in co-authorship, everything does tend to feel a lot more messy, because at the end, when you read other people's work, they've been through that process and they tend to get more tidy at the end. So it's inevitably more messy in the actual project than you kind of get from other people's reporting of them. And then co-authorship, my opinion, total mess, like total mess. And Castleton et al, really interesting work that I learned a lot from. They did co-authorship in Indigenous and First Nations communities in what you'd color in on the map as Canada. Wrote that researchers have a responsibility to introduce new ideas. And in this, they're talking about co-authorship as a challenge to the status quo and the challenge to traditional views of what knowledge is and who holds it. Co-authorship is a mess because it's challenging those things while also, in some ways, legitimizing and kind of sustaining those processes. So especially if you're co-authoring academic outputs, that process of challenging academic publishing by being co-authors is also really sustaining it because you're producing those publications. It's a messy thing. And those interactions of challenging the status quo are always messy and always complicated. Do you mind if I pause for a second? I just want to reflect on some of this messiness. I can't speak about it because I don't understand it and I don't know what it means, but I can speak of it as a man, and I don't need a cookie for being a man in this space. But there are very rarely men working on this, and that's a thing. And I don't know how sexism operates. I can see that it probably does, but I don't know how it operates in this space. And this process is a mess. I feel like I have to speak of it, even if I can't speak about it. It's a real mess. Being part of these networks and systems and inequalities, and then trying to do the work. Now, co-authorship, I think, is a mess. It's also a challenge. Castleton have some really fantastic, really helpful reflections on this. So I hope you check it out if you need them, including reflections from researchers who have many reflections. One I picked out was that they struggle in relationships with other researchers who may think they're just being politically correct, who think co-authorship is really a load of garbage, or is playing a card. And also this challenge of relationships with co-authors that feel like they want to speak for themselves. Basically, it's a huge challenge to be balancing these two and to have to operate in kind of two roles. Number one, with co-authors, let's say young co-authors who may be very excited to write, and at the same time deal with these institutional situations where, I don't know if you've been in them, but sometimes the shields go up and the phases go on quicker than anything this side of the Starship Enterprise when you talk about working closely with community groups. People who just think that that's, not what academia is about. This is a challenge, and undertaking co-authorship means facing it. Now, like I said, in this kind of work, this presentation, I want to focus on the experience of being the researcher, if you want to call it that. And so that's kind of what I want to do here. Some of the ways to articulate these challenges for the researcher, I think, are kind of outlined by people like Tiffany Page on vulnerable writing, that actually we, as authors ourselves and as researchers, are kind of stepping out into a place of being vulnerable by doing co-authorship. We're trying to understand the stories of others, while also kind of recognizing that we don't know and we never will know. We're also vulnerable to a lot of different things. One of them is celebration, or being put in a silo while being celebrated. I feel inside myself that this is a kind of a weirdification, that sometimes people will celebrate you as they celebrate young people themselves for being there and doing this work. Oh, it's so wonderful. But by celebrating you, they kind of identify you as separate and different and almost put you in that silo where, you know, that's the person who does the co-authorship. That's great, but it's not really what we do. You know what I mean? So this is a kind of a process of and a challenge that's different in every context of being celebrated and really, in a way, tokenized sometimes and put into a silo, the weird one. In a deeper way that I can only really start to present, I feel that a lot of co-authorship ends up with researchers being identified as risky or complaining, identifying problems with the status quo, always has these complex situations attached to them. There's a real problem with burnout and senses of imposter syndrome. This is really complicated, and I know we all go through it, but for one thing, if you're writing something that your heart goes into and you really care about your co-authors, you can end up with burnout just because you don't always have control over the project, but you really want to do something to support people with it. And then Castleton et al. Again have a really interesting synopsis of some different experiences of researcher precarity, irritation with processes and things like that. One that they point out is that co-authorship can take a long time, and it's not an efficient way to just be pumping out publications. If you're in a precarious contract position, that can be an extremely difficult situation for you. I try to think, because when I present, I always want to have like a take-home message, and this meme turned up on my Twitter this week. I think it's perfect. If you're thinking about co-authorship and you would like the support of some advice, I think the three things that I've got for you are, number one, it's a tricky, messy business. That's what it is. It's always complicated. Second, be prepared for burnout, and the burnout specifically that comes from wanting to do work that kind of speaks to you, that you think there's a big purpose behind it, but still having to deal with those institutional parameters and still having to deal with funding bodies or whatever. Set clear goals for yourself, right? Identify what you want to do. And then to plan to support yourself, because as Pooja Kishanani teaches us, or quoted to us from Robin Wall-Kimmerer, all flourishing is mutual. If you as the researcher who is nominally in charge of the project aren't flourishing, nobody else will. So you have to look after yourself. You have to be there as a co-author and support yourself as part of the team. So co-authorship is a mess. It's the difficult part. Now we get on to some more fun. The second part I want to talk to you about is being the mess bringer. So by mess, I kind of want to get into, I think it's Helen Thomas Hughes and this question of messy research, rich research, as opposed to a more traditional ideal of well-ordered research. And specifically, we've got Cook here talking about young people. Well, I'm talking about young people. They're talking about the interconnectedness of relationships in research. With young people, our inquiries are extremely complicated. And so co-authorship is a way to explore those. But in a way, I think quite often we're the ones bringing that interconnectedness. We may find in co-authorship that our young co-authors are actually expecting more ordered research than they get. They may, it may be us kind of bringing in those complex approaches and suggesting them. In some ways, I think co-authorship is a process of bringing the mess to people who may be more pragmatic than we expect, or cautious because they maybe haven't authored things before and maybe come into the room feeling like it might end up being a more structured thing than actually we have the freedom to do. Again, I wish we had all day. I had to narrow this down, and I thought what I'll do is I'll suggest an approach to co-authorship based on mentorship. So if you have a group of young co-authors, one role that you have is to co-author a paper, but another is to mentor them as writers. A lot of them may have writing experience of their own, but you're still mentoring them through that process. We live in precarious times. Young people tend to be under a lot of pressure. So your mentorship may be pointing out to them, absolutely, definitely put me down as a reference. Pointing out that even if something takes 2 to 3 years to publish in an academic publishing process, that they can put it as forthcoming on their CV. Even some early career researchers have never been told that. That's an important thing. Another process of mentorship may be to kind of build and construct a process of authorship that supports young people as kind of becoming authors. So one is maybe not to just jump into a big academic, a big blank document on Google Docs or something, but to offer more flexible ways to write. So for instance, in one project that I'm writing, we've just recently finished, we offered short testimonials, and then we kind of put it together almost like a pastiche as academic editors and sent it back. What do you think about this? How do you like how your testimonial fits in? The take home I've got for you on this section is always be asking. Co-authorship is context specific. The young people you work with are the authors and may well be the majority of the authors. And so you should always be asking them what the context is for them. Always be asking them what they need. Always be asking them, did you fill in your timesheet? Because you absolutely have to. Always be asking them, how's your CV doing? Would you like somebody to have a look at it? Because that somebody's me. Always be asking what they need, what they want, where they're going. Third, I'm going a little bit over time, Ben. I'm sorry. Not too far over time though. The third is about articulating messiness, and Petter White and Ferguson here talk about proceeding ethically anyway. They went through a co-authorship project, co-research project with a full ethics process, and then in the end dispensed with the ethics process because it required the young people to be anonymous. And so they basically had to separate themselves from the ethics process in order to be ethical. I think my response to these kind of difficult institutional relationships we have with universities and with publishers when it comes to co-authorship is that really we have to be active in choosing it. You know, I don't think that co-authorship is something that really we should apologize for. I think it's true that co-authorship, especially if you're publishing in an academic journal or something like that, it both challenges that status quo and it sustains it in a way. I think that's okay. That's kind of what we're doing. If it wasn't okay, we probably wouldn't do academic co-authorship. You know, it's what we're doing. There are a few things we can do though. One of them is subversion. So I thought a little bit about this and about Matt Flinders's work on triple writing in political science, where he talked about academic publications where the author writes 3 times. So they write one academic output, one that's maybe for practitioners or for policymakers, and one that's like publicly accessible and actually readable. And I think that's a really interesting tool, which I've never used, but which I'm now like really excited to do with young people. To say, look, we're writing this and we are publishing it for an academic press, but it's like not ideal. Why don't we write something at the same time that like actual people will read, and how do we get that out? I think that kind of subversion of the process, if you like, might be interesting. Second, it's sometimes possible to adapt to these processes. So although kind of being in an academic publication sometimes feels like selling out, one thing you can do if you like kind of identify yourself as the academic is present yourself in a way as that kind of scientific voice and just say, the young people are here, listen to them, you know? So we can establish a clear academic authorial voice, I think, sometimes, and then point out that our co-authorship then derives that kind of power from the young people's voice. And then thirdly, yeah, we can resist these processes. And I think sometimes, particularly processes of ethical research where kind of the bottom line is actually the university covering it. But I do need to be challenged. Actually working very closely with young people is a really interesting space for looking at the shortcomings of our university procedures. So that's what I've got for you on academic co-authorship. Yes, sometimes it's a challenge to be publishing in these places that aren't ideal, but sometimes it's good to be there and challenging them. And it's true, I think. We have to flourish together. So to sum up, and this is the end, number one, co-authorship is a mess. Be prepared for it. Support yourself. Be prepared to feel burnout, especially if it's something you really truly believe in, but you're also up against things like 2-year publishing timelines, which just don't match up with what young people have. For a young person, often life is completely different over the course of 2 months, let alone 2 years. 2, be the mess bringer, and in some ways expect co-authors, I think, to be more pragmatic than sometimes an academic co-author is. Always be asking, always be a mentor, be there for co-authors, find out what they need, lean into those questions like, has anybody ever looked at your CV? Because I'd love to do it. And then finally, that articulating messiness comes in many ways. They're context specific, but you can be creative with things. Yeah, you can be creative with your own authorial voice and all sorts of things like that. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. I hope it supports anybody specifically. I mean, it's especially if you're thinking about co-authorship yourself. It's been a really exciting journey for me. So I'm glad to share some of it with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben. Maybe again, if everyone want to give a bit of a round of applause to Ben, virtual round of applause. Really interesting. Probably best summed up as kind of organized chaos. Really, really fascinating though. We've probably got time for a very quick question. If someone has a question that they want to raise, yes, Cassie, saw you with your hand up first. So if you want to speak.
Hi Ben, Ben and Ben. That was a really lovely presentation. I really loved your phrase weirdification. I think that might be my new favourite word. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really brilliant how you drew attention to all of those complexities, and that I really empathise with that set of experience too. I just wanted to raise 2 particular complexities and hear you say a little bit more about them. So in terms of working with young people, I just wondered how you dealt with the particular challenges around kind of expecting continuity or sort of amount of time, because it did sound like you were talking about expecting a sort of at least somewhat coherent group of consistent participation. And obviously that then excludes some people or, you know, sets up certain expectations. And also, like, alongside that, you mentioned that thing about sometimes young people might be more cautious about co-authorship, but also I wonder if perhaps sometimes they're not only quite heavily invested in those ideas about what writing might be, but also about the thing you're researching. So where young people are perhaps invested, you know, you as a perhaps more of an outsider figure might be able to see things happening, and how you dealt with some or have dealt with some of those complexities where young people perhaps have sort of absorbed mainstream discourses. Yeah, not sure that's a quick question, sorry.
It's 2 questions, but thank you for them. Yeah, that's okay. Ben, shall I jump in? Yeah, so, thank you. The first question was about expecting continuity and time. I can't remember who said it, which is very bad of me, but somebody described time. They said time is to qualitative research and to co-production, I think it was, what a supercomputer is to like climate modeling, atmospheric modeling. Time is really important in these projects. For one thing, and it's the same with our students, young people go through so much. I mean, we all do, but as a youth studies person, the things they go through are huge, and they're under so much pressure all the time, really, we need time to build those relationships with people where we can talk about the kind of topics that they want to talk about. And we don't always have that time. The other is that there's a really weird, it's a weird juxtaposition of time between somebody who's, say, a sixth former and is expecting to, they'll have exams in a couple of weeks, and then over the summer they don't really know what they're going to do, and then maybe they'll be applying for university. Like this time scale is really rapid compared to, I don't know, like an academic funding body. Or one time I went to it's out, but I published a journal article and it took 4 years to come out in press. Like, what? That's like, if you're 16, you're 20 when it comes out. Like, what? That's bizarre. You can't even, like, for a lot of 16-year-olds, getting to 20 is a lifetime. And quite rightly, I mean, they've got a faster and pressurized time. So I think that's in some ways is an impossible divide. My feeling on it is that it's completely impossible. And that I think what I've learned is that I need to do better about writing multiple things at once. Just because I could be writing things in, say, the conversation with young authors that would come out quickly. And it's really my failure that I haven't done it. But, I take the L and move on. We've got some good things coming out, but it's like, when will they be published? Well, the publisher says maybe in the summer, maybe in the autumn. Like, everybody's life has changed along the way. The other is about, I guess, from listening to your question, is about holding on to participation, or what sometimes research projects call attrition. And that's really tricky too. You'll have people who are really excited to work with you at the start of the project. And then at the end of the project, you can't get them on email, or they don't have time to come to the meeting. And I frankly don't know what to do with that. I find it really, really, really challenging, and actually kind of ethically challenging. I think that might just be a problem that we have to deal with context by context. The other thing you asked was about young people being invested in the topic of research. And I think you're completely right. I really have an answer, but I do have a reflection, which is that I think we have to be really careful and really, like, radically honest with the fire alarm. I have to be really honest with our power and our limitation, because I mean, I'm just like a guy in an office. I can't do a lot, but at the same time, I can actually do a lot. And so to be clear about those things, where we might publish the work, who might actually read it. I mean, probably not Joe Biden, but maybe if we worked on it, we could get Andy Burnham to read it. And that might actually be what we want. So I think that's good. I'm challenged, sorry, just a little really short reflection. I'm challenged by work that talks about researcher power in those relationships, because I do feel like I want those relationships to be horizontal, but I think part of my role there is to be happy and comfortable in the power that I've got, and honest about it. This is what I can do, this is how I can help, and this is how we can work together as a team. Does that answer? Those were two really interesting questions.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel like I didn't explain my second question very well, but maybe I'll drop you a message afterwards. Okay. It's clearly a long, it's a bigger topic than a 1 minute question. Thank you very much, Ben. That was really interesting.
Great. Thanks, Cassie. Thanks, Ben. So what I think two really interesting presentations and some really interesting questions. What we want to do next is move into some breakout rooms, but what I thought could be useful is I could just kind of do a little bit of a summary of some of the themes that I've kind of heard that have come out, and we can kind of use those as provocations, perhaps, kind of when we move into group discussions. So one of the things I think, and this probably reiterates or repeats a little bit of what Cassie just mentioned, is kind of that dialectic, or kind of, I guess, productive tension between the messiness, the kind of chaotic elements of doing co-research and co-production, at the same time as trying to have, I guess, linear processes to some extent, setting expectations, and where and how we kind of move in that space with young people. I think that's really interesting. And I think another thing that came out for me was very much about how do we do impact? How do we set expectations with young people around impact? And across both presentations, I was kind of hearing about, I guess, kind of how we enter young people's kind of life and political projects as much as they kind of are entering our life and political projects as well. And how do we kind of navigate those experiences on both sides and kind of the benefits, I guess, that we want to establish with young people, but also the tensions, kind of the researcher, researched and co-researchers, the tensions in between those people, as much as tensions between us and us young people and institutions, and kind of the infrastructure that exists. And I was really interested in that last comment by Ben as well, around kind of like how impact is also related to the life transitions that young people are kind of encountering and going through at different times, but also more broadly. And I think we heard this across both presentations, that impact has a really I think strong affective dimension, and how are we tapping into that affective dimension on both our side as researchers and for young people, and also the kind of gendered dimension as well, and the emotional labor that kind of goes into some of this work, and where that kind of falls and doesn't fall, and the value that we place on these forms of research. I think these are really interesting kind of thoughts, at least, to kind of move forward, and we can kind of have and take this in the direction that we want to within individual breakout rooms.
Step by step.
So we've only got about 10 minutes left, but I just thought what we might be able to do is, if the presenters are happy to kind of lead this section, just kind of talk through some of the issues and I guess points of discussion that came up in your groups. I don't know, Ben, I'm kind of focusing on you because your camera's on.
Yeah, sure. So in our group, we had me, you heard from me. So Anna from York and Leeds was talking about her work with youth councils, and kind of the question from young people in the group about co-authoring a chapter in a book, which was really interesting. We had a question, discussion from Denna from Nottingham Trent about different inequalities across young people. So how youth intersects with those inequalities, and the challenge of not just ending up with a Word document that is read by you and the supervisor, which I feel, I mean, it speaks to me that you put so much work into writing something, and then who reads it, you know, and coming back to young people with that is a really challenging question. But Alicia talking about participatory action research, really important, a way for working with young people. And we have Rebecca talking about the experiences of training teachers in music. So we had a really I thought it was a really interesting discussion, especially about methods. Yeah. Is that okay? Did I do the job reporting? Is it all right?
Yes, you get a big tick. Thanks, Ben. Grace.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we also had some great conversations really around the different layers of complexity of all this. So things are far from linear, and trying to map onto some of those linear processes is to plagiarize, or to take Ben's term of messiness. It really is about a lot of working through that. And I think part of that, we also sort of talked about our experiences of how we motivate young people, or when motivations and expectations perhaps differ and are fluid and a change at different time points, and not just of young people, but if we're working closely with gatekeepers in terms of schools, that their motivations for young people's involvement can be very different, and we are still dependent perhaps, or reliant on gatekeepers to enable us to access young people, to include them in research, but their ideas about what that research should look like, what young people's involvement should look like, also adds to the layers of the complexities and the messiness of all that. I don't think we came to any kind of solutions to any of that, just a common sharing of, yes, this is all messy, but we're committed to trying to work out ways of doing that. And I think it's about that kind of enabling having research that is fluid enough, or kind of can be changed, and thinking about that from the outset in terms of ensuring that when unexpected challenges arise, that we can think about how we might change some parts of the research. I hope I captured most of those, but I don't know if Niamh wanted.
Yeah, I mean, you covered that way. Just as really around, we also spoke about barriers that we can't plan for. You know, one thing that is very consistent across this work is the unplanning for. We try to get a plan in place, but we have to know that things have to be very flexible and very fluid. But just being aware of those things, and that sometimes that can put, you know, potential students, you know, doctoral students or whatever, wanting to use this approach in their study, that can put them off. But just to reassure them that this is very, very normal, and that we just kind of have to have contingencies in place, and you know, making sure that young people are encouraged to be involved and motivated to be involved as well, despite these challenges.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Grace. And I think sort of similar themes come up in our group as well that I was in, just talking about. And I think that idea of kind of planning for uncertainty, but I guess it also becomes a difficulty when funders need some level of certainty in funding applications and in terms of reporting, and also that idea about gatekeeping and who is gatekeeping, and then also being able to re-engage young people. And it can be quite different trying to keep a 7 or 8-year-old engaged compared to a 16 or 17-year-old, where there are different kind of ages and requirements, and depending on how you interact with different institutions. Maybe I'll just, because I'm very conscious of time, we've only got 4 or 5 minutes left, just want to hand back to you three as the presenters, maybe just to say a last word on the topic, on co-research, co-production and participatory research. And yeah, I'll kind of leave it with you. Like, what's your kind of your takeaway that you would like people to take away today from the discussion? In a very short, you know, Twitter, 140 words or less.
Okay, well, I think I'm still learning how to do this, but it's about the letting go, or the kind of you know, not being in control and feeling comfortable with that. So to facilitate young people's sort of meaningful involvement in research.
Thanks, Grace.
For me, it's around motivation and expectations, really, keeping young people motivated and engaged, and realizing that they don't have to be involved all the way through to all the way at the end, but it's about meaningful involvement at stages of the research, if that's what's required. But, you know, to make sure that young people are meaningfully involved all the way, not in a tokenistic way, but also making sure that our expectations meet their motivations.
Thanks, Dave.
If I could say one thing, it's that that although we often think about young people and we want to work on their behalf and help them, we are really under a lot of pressure. We're often in situations of precarity, and that the academy in general is not always a friendly place to be. And so co-authorship is something that seems really beautiful and lovely, and a lot of people really want to do it. It's also really challenging to fit that into to all these inequalities that we face and the things that bind us. So I hope that's okay, and I think it's okay to hold it and say, I'd love to do this for these young people, but also to say, but I also have to flourish myself, and it's always going to be a challenge. So maybe we can be careful about what we do and how we plan it, and I can make sure to look after myself as part of the team. That's really important. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. So I think a good reflection actually from all three of you to kind of finish. So if we just want to give another virtual round of applause to all of our three presenters and their inputs and reflections, which are really appreciated and found really fascinating today. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for everyone for attending as well. There will be a feedback form coming soon in your email inboxes. Ben looks like he wants to say something. Ben?
To say thank you to you for your chairing, and to Dior for our support from Vera. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, and yes, thanks Dior. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.